I'm 32, director of student equity initiatives at a state university. Been in this role for 3 years now. Honestly, thought I'd be changing the world by now. Instead, I'm staring at a spreadsheet that makes my stomach turn. Male enrollment down 23% over 5 years. Female students now outnumber males 61 to 39. Getting worse every semester. Dean called an emergency meeting about it. I walked in thinking I'd just nod along and get back to planning our Women's Leadership Summit. Turns out they wanted solutions from me specifically. Meeting starts, and Dean Thomas pulls up the numbers. Engineering program used to be 70% male. Now it's 54% male, and they're worried it'll keep dropping. Computer science down to 65% from 82%. Even the business school is seeing declines. Dean asks me directly what I think is causing it. I give him my honest assessment. While we've made campus much more welcoming for women over the past decade, it's natural that men might feel less centered here. That's actually a good thing in terms of equity. He stares at me. Rachel, we're going to have to close programs if this continues. We need tuition revenue from both genders. I feel my face get hot. I think calling it a crisis is premature. Women were underrepresented for decades. Maybe this is just a correction. Provost Maria jumps in. A correction would be 50-50. We're heading towards 65 to 35 based on current trends. That's not equity. That's just inverse inequality. I argue that we should focus on the opportunity this creates for women. The looks I get around the table, like I just suggested burning down the library. Thomas cuts me off. We're forming a task force. You'll be on it. First meeting is Wednesday. Great. Wednesday comes, task force is me, 2 admissions people, Richard from Student Affairs, and David, some economics professor I've never liked. David always had this condescending energy in faculty meetings. We go around introducing ourselves and our perspectives. When it's David's turn, he pulls out actual research papers. I've been studying this trend nationally. It's not just us. Male enrollment is down across the country, but it's worst at schools that have implemented certain types of programming. He's looking at me when he says it. I ask him what he means by certain types. Well, mandatory orientation modules about masculinity and privilege, for instance, residential policies that treat male students as inherently more dangerous, academic programming that consistently frames historical male achievement as suspect. I can feel myself getting defensive. Those programs are evidence-based. They're designed to create safer, more inclusive environments. David nods like he expected this. Inclusive for whom, though? Because the data suggests they're making a significant portion of our potential student body feel excluded. I counter that discomfort isn't the same as exclusion. Men feeling less centered isn't the same as women feeling unsafe. There's a difference between losing privilege and facing discrimination. Richard, who I thought would back me up, actually sides with David. I've been doing exit interviews with male students who transfer out. The word that keeps coming up is unwelcome. They feel like they're constantly being told they're the problem. I jump on this. Maybe that's because statistically men do commit more violence, more harassment. We have to acknowledge reality. David leans forward. Do you apply that statistical reasoning to other demographics? If a certain ethnicity is overrepresented in campus disciplinary statistics, would you say we should treat all members of that group with heightened suspicion? I feel trapped. That's completely different. Those are racist stereotypes. This is about documented patterns of gendered violence. So collective judgment is acceptable for gender, but not race. The admissions woman, Jennifer, shifts uncomfortably. I try to reframe. We're talking about systemic power dynamics, syntax, not individual prejudice. David pulls out a document. Let me read you something from our current freshman orientation manual. This is in the section all students are required to complete. He reads, men must recognize their role in perpetuating rape culture and take active steps to deconstruct their masculine socialization. He looks up. Can you explain how that isn't treating male students as collectively guilty? I wrote that section. I try to explain the context. It's about awareness. Men benefit from patriarchy whether they want to or not. Acknowledging that isn't an attack. But you're requiring 18-year-old boys to confess to benefiting from a system they didn't create as a condition of attending this university. It's not a confession. It's education. Semantics. The effect is the same. And based on our enrollment numbers, that effect is driving them away. Jennifer mentioned something that makes it worse. We've also been tracking social media mentions of our university. There are entire forums of high school boys warning each other not to apply here. My heart sinks, but I stay defensive. So, we should cater to misogynists. Let them dictate our values. Richard shakes his head. Rachel, these aren't misogynists. I've read the threads. They're just normal kids who are scared they'll be blamed for things they didn't do. If they're not doing anything wrong, they have nothing to worry about. The silence that follows is deafening. David breaks it. That's literally the logic used to justify every authoritarian overreach in history. Nothing to hide, nothing to fear. I'm surprised to hear it from someone in your position. I'm losing this argument, and I know it. I try another angle. What about the women who finally feel safe here? Should we sacrifice their comfort to maintain gender balance? David doesn't miss a beat. What evidence do you have that current female students feel safer than they did 10 years ago? Do we have data showing reduced assault rates, increased comfort levels, better mental health outcomes? I don't have those numbers ready, he continues, because I do have data. Depression and anxiety rates among our female students are actually higher now than they were a decade ago, despite all our programming. Whatever we're doing, it's not working for anyone. Jennifer adds something that stings. Also, in confidential surveys, female students are increasingly saying they wish there were more male students on campus. They're noticing the gender imbalance too, and many don't like it. I argue that's probably about dating, not academics. So, women's social preferences matter when it comes to having men around, but men's sense of belonging doesn't matter when they say our environment is hostile. Richard puts it even more bluntly. Rachel, I think you need to consider that your perspective might be part of the problem we're trying to solve. I feel attacked. My perspective, I'm trying to protect vulnerable students, but you've defined vulnerable students in a way that excludes half the population by default. You can't protect some students by making others feel unwelcome and then claim you're being equitable. David suggests we look at specific programs. He pulls out a list of every initiative I've implemented. The ally training that requires men to acknowledge their potential to harm. The consent workshops where male students role-play as potential aggressors. The residential life policies that assign male students to sensitivity training after noise complaints, but not female students. The student org funding formula that prioritizes women-only groups. Seeing it all listed out like this makes me uncomfortable. I defend each one individually. David dismantles each defense. The ally training, you say it's voluntary, but it's required for student leadership positions, residence hall jobs, and teaching assistantships. That's not voluntary. That's coercive. I argue those positions require higher standards of political compliance. You're essentially requiring male students to adopt your ideological framework to access opportunities. How is that different from a religious institution requiring statements of faith? Because this isn't religion. It's ethics. Ethics according to whom? Your particular framework isn't universal truth, Rachel. It's a political position, and you're enforcing it through institutional power. I'm getting frustrated. So, what's your solution? We just ignore sexism, pretend everything is fine. David's response is calm and measured, which makes it worse. No, we address actual incidents with actual evidence. We create genuinely inclusive programming that doesn't assume any student is defective based on their demographics. We stop treating normal adolescent male behavior as toxic unless it actually harms someone. All men benefit from patriarchy. That's not political. That's factual. Even if I grant that claim, which I don't. How does making individual young men confess to benefiting from a system change that system? It doesn't. It just makes them resent you and avoid environments where you have power over them. So, we should coddle their fragility. There it is, Richard says quietly. Everyone looks at him. That's the attitude that's killing our enrollment. You just called normal human responses to being stereotyped fragility. You can't insult people into agreeing with you, Rachel. Jennifer brings up something I didn't know about. We've also lost 4 male faculty members in the last 2 years who cited the campus climate in their exit interviews. I knew they left, but not why. What did they say specifically? that they felt constantly under suspicion, that their teaching was over, scrutinized, that students felt empowered to make bad faith complaints because of the way our policies are worded. I start to argue, but David interrupts. Do you know why I'm on this task force, Rachel? I was asked specifically because 3 years ago, a student filed a Title IX complaint against me for creating a hostile environment for women. Want to know what I did? I wait. I assigned a paper on the gender wage gap and included a reading that questioned some of the methodology of the commonly cited statistics. I didn't even take a position. I just included alternate perspectives. The complaint went nowhere, but I had to sit through an investigation. Do you know what that does to a professor? I try to say Title IX protections are important. They are. But you've created an environment where the process is the punishment, where any male professor or student can be subjected to an investigation based on someone feeling uncomfortable with a perspective they disagree with. Better to overprotect than underprotect. Is it because we're not overprotecting? We're creating an environment of suspicion and anxiety that hurts everyone, including the women you think you're helping. Richard agrees. The female students I talk to are stressed about finding internships, managing debt, career prospects. The programming we're offering them is about microaggressions and emotional safety. There's a mismatch. I feel like I'm being ganged up on. So everything I've worked for is wrong. All the progress we've made. David's voice softens slightly. What progress, Rachel? Specifically, what measurable outcomes have improved because of your programs? I list things. Women feel more empowered to report harassment. We have more women in leadership positions. We have more awareness of gender issues. Reports are up, but are actual incidents down? Or have you just lowered the threshold for what counts as harassment? I don't have data on actual incidents and women in leadership positions. Is that because of merit-based achievement or because you've created quotas and set aids? There's nothing wrong with affirmative action. There is when it creates resentment and undermines the accomplishments of the very people you're trying to help. If everyone knows positions are allocated by gender rather than merit, it delegitimizes women's achievements. Jennifer drops another bomb. We've also seen a decline in applications from high-achieving male students. Specifically, the boys who are still applying have lower average test scores and grade point averages than 5 years ago. Maybe that reflects that testing is biased. David actually laughs. You can't have it both ways. Either academic metrics matter or they don't, but you can't say they matter when women outperform and dismiss them when men do, Richard adds. And this matters for campus culture, too. The male students we are getting are, well, they're not the ones who challenge the status quo in good faith ways. We're selecting for compliance or apathy. What's wrong with compliance with basic human decency? Because you've defined basic human decency to include ideological positions that reasonable people can disagree with. The meeting goes on for another hour. Every point I make gets countered. Every program I defend gets questioned. David asks me directly at one point, Rachel, do you actually like men as a category? I'm taken aback. What kind of question is that? A relevant one. Because everything you've built here seems premised on the assumption that men are defective women, that masculinity itself is a problem to be solved rather than a natural expression of human diversity. Masculinity is currently constructed as harmful. To whom says who? Based on what universal standard? Based on outcomes, violence, aggression, dominance. Some men are violent, vanishingly few, actually. But you're treating all men as potentially violent and requiring they prove otherwise. That's textbook prejudice. I try to explain intersectionality, how men have structural power even if individuals don't feel powerful. David nods along, then asks, do the boys who grow up in poverty, who have no father figures, who struggle in school systems designed for female learning styles, who die by suicide at 4 times the rate of girls, do they have structural power? Yes, because they're still men in a patriarchal society. So even when they're suffering more than their female peers by every measurable metric, they're still privileged. Privilege isn't about feelings. No, but clearly enrollment numbers are, and those boys aren't choosing to come here. Richard brings it back to practical concerns. We need actionable changes. The dean wants recommendations by next month. I know what's coming. David suggests a complete audit of all my programs. Jennifer wants to revise orientation materials. Richard suggests male-specific mentoring and support programs. I object to the last one immediately. We can't have men-only programs. That violates our equity principles. David's response is icy. We have 17 women-only programs, the Society for Women Engineers, Women in Business, Women's Leadership Initiative. Shall I continue? Those address historical underrepresentation, and now men are underrepresented on this campus overall. So by your logic, we should create support structures. It's not the same. Why not? Specifically, logically, why not? I can't articulate it in a way that doesn't sound hypocritical. I try, because women face systemic barriers. What systemic barriers exist at a university where there's 61% of students perform better academically on average and have access to more support programs and scholarships? I mentioned society beyond campus. We're not trying to fix society, Rachel. We're trying to run a university. And at this university, men are now the underrepresented minority. The word minority applied to men feels wrong, but I can't explain why. Jennifer suggests something that makes me want to scream. What if we did targeted outreach to male high school students, emphasized programs in majors where men are particularly underrepresented, like what we do for women in STEM? Exactly. I start to object, but David cuts me off. Let me guess. When we recruit women for engineering, that's correcting inequality. But recruiting men for education or nursing would be reinforcing stereotypes. That is what I was going to say. Those aren't equivalent situations. They are now. Men are 23% of education majors here. Women are 31% of engineering majors. Which is the bigger gap? I hate that math proves him right. The meeting ends with assignments. I'm supposed to draft revised orientation materials, remove gender-specific language that implies collective guilt, create programming that's actually inclusive. I feel like I'm being asked to dismantle everything I built. That night, I draft an email to the dean explaining why this task force is misguided, how we're capitulating to fragile masculinity, how this will hurt women. I don't send it. I know how it would be received. Next task force meeting is worse. David brings student quotes from those online forums. Reading them out loud is painful. Every orientation session felt like an accusation. I just wanted to study computer science, not apologize for being born male. The RA training made it clear they assumed I was a potential predator. I transferred after one semester. I got reported for asking a study group question that made a girl uncomfortable. Nothing happened officially, but everyone looked at me differently after. I argue these could be cherry-picked. They're not. I have 47 similar testimonials just from students who left our university specifically. Richard has his own. I interviewed 12 male students currently enrolled. Want to know what they said? He reads from notes. Most said they keep their heads down. Don't engage in class discussions about anything gender-related. Avoid being alone with female students. Don't join clubs or activities where they might be accused of making someone uncomfortable. That sounds like paranoia. Does it? Or is it rational risk assessment based on the environment we've created? Jennifer shares application trend data. Inquiries from male students are down 31% year over year. When they survey interested students who don't apply, the feedback is damning. Campus culture seems hostile to normal guys, too politically correct, feels like you have to walk on eggshells. I argue we don't want students who can't handle basic respect. David's response is sharp. You're conflating disagreement with disrespect. These are 18-year-old kids who want to learn and grow, not constantly prove their ideological purity. No one's asking for ideological purity. Yes, you are. You've created litmus tests for acceptable masculinity. Men who don't perform contrition to your satisfaction are labeled problematic. Richard brings up mental health data I didn't know about. Male students report higher rates of isolation and depression than 5 years ago. Fewer men seeking campus mental health services despite greater need. When asked why, they say they don't trust the counseling center. Why not? I ask. He looks uncomfortable. Because the intake forms ask about toxic masculine attitudes, and several counselors are on record saying they view traditional masculinity as inherently pathological. I helped develop those intake forms. I thought we were being thorough. Identifying harmful thought patterns isn't the same as pathizing. Rachel, if a counseling center asked about problematic ethnic attitudes or unhealthy feminine traits, you'd rightfully call that discriminatory. This is no different. David suggests we bring in student voices. Next meeting includes a panel, 3 male students who almost transferred, 2 who did transfer and came back. Listening to them is harder than I expected. They're not the stereotypes I had in my head. They're thoughtful, articulate, genuinely hurt. One talks about being told his opinion didn't matter in a sociology class because of his positionality. Another describes being excluded from a study group because the women felt more comfortable without men. A third explains how he stopped raising his hand after a professor praised a female student for making the same point he'd made 5 minutes earlier, adding, "It's good to hear from diverse voices." I ask if they ever considered that maybe they were being sensitive. The looks I get. One responds carefully, "Ma'am, with respect, if women reported feeling excluded and we told them they were being sensitive, what would you call that?" That's different. Women face actual discrimination, and we don't. Being assumed to be dangerous, having our perspectives dismissed because of our gender, being excluded from opportunities, that's not discrimination. I try to explain structural versus individual. He cuts me off politely. I understand the theory. I took your required orientation, but theory doesn't change the fact that I feel unwelcome at my own university. Another student says something that sticks with me. I came here excited to learn. I wanted to be challenged to grow, but instead of being challenged intellectually, I feel like I'm constantly being challenged morally. Like I have to prove I'm one of the good ones. David asks him to elaborate. Every man here feels like they're on probation. One accusation, even unfounded, and your life is over. So we just disengage, keep quiet, don't take risks. It's the opposite of education. Jennifer asks, what would make them feel more welcome? The answers are simpler than I expected. Just treat us like individuals, not representatives of our gender. Stop assuming the worst about us. Have some programs that acknowledge our struggles too. Don't make us apologize for existing. After they leave, I'm quiet. I feel like my entire worldview is being challenged, but I'm not ready to concede. Those students are one perspective. What about the women who feel safer now? Richard has been waiting for this. I asked. I surveyed a random sample of 200 female students. Want to know what they said? I braced myself. Most said they didn't feel significantly safer than they imagined they would have a decade ago. Some said the constant focus on danger and victimization actually makes them more anxious. And several said explicitly they think we've overcorrected. He shows me that's not what I expected. One quote jumps out. I want to be treated like a capable adult, not a fragile victim who needs constant protection. David circles back to outcomes. Let's say we accept every premise of your worldview. Patriarchy exists. Men have structural power. Women need support. Fine. Has anything you've implemented actually dismantled patriarchy or empowered women in measurable ways? I list the leadership programs again. He's ready. Your Women's Leadership Initiative has graduated 150 women over 3 years. How many are in actual leadership positions now? I don't know. I looked it up. 8%. Your program is expensive, high profile, and has an 8% success rate at its stated goal. Leadership takes time. Sure, but you're spending significant resources on programming that makes people feel good while ignoring practical barriers like childcare costs, inflexible academic schedules, and lack of professional networking. Jennifer agrees. The female students I talk to want internship connections and job skills, not empowerment workshops. I feel everything I've built crumbling. I try one last argument. Even if the outcomes aren't perfect, we've changed the culture. Women feel more empowered to speak up. Richard responds gently. Rachel, I think you've created a culture where certain women feel empowered to speak up about certain things in certain ways. But you've also created a culture where thoughtful disagreement is labeled problematic, where men are afraid to engage, where intellectual diversity is dying, David adds. And practically, you're destroying the university's financial model. We need male students. We need their tuition. We need gender balance for a healthy campus culture. Your programs are actively driving them away. So, money matters more than safety. False dichotomy. We can have both, but right now we have neither. We're losing revenue and our students report higher anxiety. The task force produces recommendations. I'm outvoted on nearly everything. Mandatory orientation modules revised to remove gender-specific blame. Residential policies made gender-neutral. Creation of men's support and mentoring programs. Audit of all student organization funding for gender equity. Revision of Title IX procedures to ensure due process. New marketing emphasizing welcome for all students. I write a minority report. It gets ignored. 6 months later, I'm sitting in another meeting. Early enrollment data shows male applications up 12%. Female applications steady. The dean is pleased. Everyone's congratulating the task force. I feel hollow. Everything I believed about creating change has been challenged. I'm supposed to implement programs I fought against, programs that seem to be working. David catches me after the meeting. I don't want his sympathy. You've dismantled years of work. No, I've helped redirect it. The goal of equity is still there. We're just pursuing it in a way that doesn't alienate half the population. You don't understand what it's like to be a woman in higher ed. You're right, I don't. But you don't understand what it's like to be an 18-year-old boy being told you're inherently problematic. Empathy goes both ways. Rachel, I want to argue, but I'm tired. Tired of being wrong in meetings. Tired of defending programs that don't work. Tired of pretending that declining male enrollment is a victory. I think about those students on the panel, how genuine they seemed, how hurt they were, how I dismissed them initially because it didn't fit my framework. That night, I look at the data again. Really look at it. Richard was right about mental health trends. David was right about program outcomes. Jennifer was right about student preferences. The only person who was consistently wrong was me. I built an empire of good intentions with terrible results. I start wondering if I've been the problem all along. Not because I'm a woman or a feminist, but because I was so sure I was right that I couldn't see the harm I was causing. I treated young men like problems to solve instead of people to educate. I created safety through exclusion instead of inclusion. I measured success by intentions instead of outcomes. The university moves forward without my vision guiding it. Enrollment stabilizes, campus culture shifts. Students seem more engaged, less anxious. The programs I designed get quietly phased out or radically revised. I'm still the director of student equity initiatives. But equity means something different now, something I'm still learning to accept. I haven't suddenly seen the light. I still believe in many of the principles I started with, but I can't deny the evidence anymore. My approach failed. Worse, it hurt people I never intended to hurt. And I was so convinced of my righteousness that I couldn't see it until the data forced me to look. Sometimes in meetings now, I stay quiet. I listen more than I talk. I ask questions instead of making pronouncements. It's humbling. It's uncomfortable. Maybe that's what growth feels like. Or maybe it's just what losing feels like. I honestly don't know anymore. If this confession kept you hooked, make sure to subscribe, like, and share. We share powerful true stories every day that explore the complex realities of life.